The rain fell in heavy drops on the muddy cobblestones of Rue Saint-Jacques, like a shroud of liquid shadows draped over the dying city. Paris, in that cursed year of 1348, oozed misery and fever, while the church bells tolled with a mournful frenzy, as if they themselves were suffocating under the weight of the Black Death. I, a mere apprentice illuminator, spent my nights scraping vellum under the flickering light of a candle, tracing illuminations that already seemed to belong to a world on the brink of vanishing. In the taverns, whispers spread of a black monk roaming the streets, hunting impure souls. Some claimed he was merely a zealous inquisitor sent by the church to cleanse the corrupt quarters, while others insisted he could see in the darkness and did not only pursue heretics. They called him the Hound of God, and where he passed, silence and fear took hold. That night, I was returning from the workshop, a dying torch in hand. The streets were deserted, haunted by the shadow of death. The silence was a monster with invisible fangs, broken only by the distant rasping of the dying and the acrid stench of the pyres where the plague-stricken and supposed heretics burned. People said evil had been summoned, that sorcerers whispered blasphemies in the dark. At the center of the square stood a tall wooden structure, its top crowned with damp kindling. Tied to the central stake, a gaunt-faced woman awaited her fate. Her dark hair, matted with ash and rain, clung in strands to her face. Her gaze, far from reflecting terror, held a strange resignation. She did not plead, did not struggle. They murmured that she had called upon spirits to heal the plague-ridden and had consorted with unholy forces. Her crime? Surviving where so many others had perished. The Inquisitor was there, cloaked in black, one hand resting upon the Holy Bible. His cold gaze swept over the crowd before settling on the condemned. His voice rang out like a divine sentence.
This woman has surrendered to darkness. She has rejected the light of Christ and given herself to witchcraft. May the fire purify her soul.
A priest made the sign of the cross, murmuring inaudible prayers beneath the roar of the rain. A hooded executioner approached, a torch in hand. With a swift motion, he set fire to the oil-soaked kindling. The flames caught quickly, dancing under the downpour, licking at the soaked dress of the condemned. The crowd held its breath. Some recited prayers, others looked away. I dared not move. Then, amidst the chaos of the blaze, a sound arose. Not a scream of pain, but a song, ancient and resonant. A whisper woven in the language of the wind and the night. A shiver ran down my spine. Was it an illusion? Or the final incantation of a soul refusing to submit? Then, silence. Her body ceased to writhe. Only ashes remained, carried away by the rain. I walked away, trembling, the taste of cinders clinging to my tongue. This sight would never leave me. The Inquisition did not merely hunt the guilty. It forged monsters, fed fear, nurtured madness. I quickened my pace, shivering beneath my soaked woolen cloak. When I saw her. She stood there, motionless beneath the gaping arch of a house devoured by time. Her silhouette seemed to hover in the murky air, her dark cloak absorbing the dim light of the dying street lamps. Her face was eerily pale, an alabaster mask where two burning pupils gleamed, abysses in which forbidden secrets lay hidden. Before I could look away, she spoke.
You are alone.
Her voice slipped into me like a whisper from another time, an echo of darkness caressing my flesh. My body froze. Yes, I was alone, drowning in a world crumbling beneath the rot of the plague. She extended a gloved hand and brushed my cheek, her skin as cold as a damp shroud.
You no longer have to fear the plague,
she breathed. A sharp pain struck my neck, a bite, exquisite and terrible. My cry died in my throat as an abyss of darkness swallowed me whole. When I opened my eyes, the night was unrecognizable. Every shadow pulsed like a living creature. Every sound resonated with inhuman intensity. I lay on the frozen stones, my mouth dry, my body gripped by a hunger that no longer belonged to this world. Above me, she stood, an enigmatic smile splitting her ivory face.
Rise,
she said.
The night is yours now.
Thus began my second life, an exile beyond time, in a Paris consumed by death, where my heart no longer beat and my hunger was no longer for bread, but for blood. Her name was Isabeau, and she was my mentor. She had not chosen me out of pity, but because she saw in me the reflection of a world fading away. My youth, my way of observing without being seen, made me a silent witness to an era on the verge of extinction. To her, I embodied the remnants of an age she had loved, an age she refused to let vanish completely. For countless nights, she taught me the arcane ways of our kind, how to scent prey, slip into the shadows, brush against humanity without ever attaching to it. She spoke of time as an unrelenting river, a cycle where all things were reborn with new faces. Yet, the more she trained me, the more I understood that her choice was also a battle against oblivion. In shaping me, she prolonged something ancient, a fragment of the past she refused to surrender to the ashes of the present. Superstitions were our armor, for the people feared demons and wandering souls. It was easier for them to blame the devil than to admit the existence of something even older. But Isabeau knew. The true ghosts were not the ones burned at the stake. But I wanted to know. Who was she before she became this nocturnal specter? One night, as we took shelter beneath the awning of an abandoned house, she offered me a glimpse of her past. Isabeau was born in Rouen, the daughter of a prosperous merchant. Her fate was meant to be that of a submissive wife, but she fled that gilded cage, choosing the uncertainty of dark alleys over the confinement of a forced marriage. In those shadows, she met her creator, an entity as fascinating as it was terrifying. He himself was little more than a wandering phantom, burdened by centuries of solitude. And in this defiant young woman he saw something more than just a meal. He offered her a cursed immortality, a rebirth into the night.
Azrael taught me everything,
she murmured.
He made me understand that we are wolves among sheep, and only the strong survive. But he also abandoned me, as he always does.
Azrael Zegri. A name that echoed like a forgotten whisper, a remnant of the days when Al-Andalus still shone beneath the light of the caliphs. But he was far older than that conquered land, older even than the empire that bore him. Isabeau rarely spoke of him. Yet, in her silences, in the troubled gleam that veiled her eyes when his name was mentioned, I sensed his immense influence. Azrael was not merely a master or a creator. He was an obsession, a scar that time could never heal. I only learned the truth one night, as we sought refuge in an abandoned cloister. The wind howled through broken arches, carrying the scent of incense and the past. Isabeau, seated on a moss-covered stone bench, seemed hesitant. Then, in a whisper, she revealed what she had never dared to confess.
Azrael was not created like us. He is far older.
She closed her eyes, as if trying to arrange her memories.
He claimed to come from the east, from an empire long since fallen, but his true origins remain a mystery. When he turned me, he entrusted me with fragments of his past. He was there when Rome crumbled under its own decadence. He witnessed Byzantium shine and fade. He walked the paths of the Crusaders, tasted the blood of kings and traitors. Every era belonged to him, yet he never truly belonged to any.
What is he searching for? I asked. Isabeau's smile was bitter.
The answer: the origin of our curse. He believes there is an explanation, a buried secret that would reveal the very essence of our nature. Some whisper that there was a first of our kind, an original source, but those are only legends. The truth? No one knows. Are we the fruit of damnation, a whim of fate, an accident that should never have been? Azrael wants to understand, not out of thirst for knowledge, but to rule. He does not settle for being a vampire. He wants to be a god.
And you? Why did you follow him? Isabeau averted her gaze. The silence stretched between us until she murmured,
Because he fascinated me. Because he made me believe that we could be something more than predators. He sought answers, like me. He wanted to understand what we are, why we exist. But I realized, too late, that this void, this ignorance, devoured him even more than thirst. Azrael lives only for the hunt, for the illusion of a meaning that always eludes him.
The first nights of my new existence were a dark fever, a whirlwind of brutal and intoxicating sensations. Isabeau taught me to hunt as one teaches a child to walk, in the shadows with patience, mastering the thirst that burned within my entrails. But that night, deep in a forgotten forest, she let me choose my first true prey. It was a game, a silent dance under the flickering glow of torches. A hunt, and a lesson. The trees cast shifting shadows under the pale moonlight. The dampness of the night clung to my cold skin as I remained still, hidden in the darkness. Below, on the path, the wavering glow of torches signaled the arrival of our prey.
They're coming,
Isabeau whispered. I sensed her more than I heard her. A barely perceptible breath, a shadow that could have been nothing more than a passing breeze. She was always so silent, so composed. I leaned forward slightly to observe the newcomers, a small caravan well guarded, a plump merchant, his face glistening with sweat beneath his heavy coat, a woman clutching a sleeping child, 3 mercenaries, weary but armed and watchful.
An escort.
Isabeau remarked.
They're cautious.
A smile stretched across my lips. That's what makes the hunt interesting. Without waiting, I dropped soundlessly from the rock where I was perched, landing on the moss-covered ground. Isabeau followed, more cautious. She liked things done properly. I, on the other hand, relished the thrill of the game. The group slowed as they reached a bend where the path narrowed between 2 fern-covered embankments. One of the mercenaries stopped abruptly, slowly turning his head toward the woods.
Something's not right,
he growled. The merchant flinched.
What? Wolves?
maybe worse.
A heavy silence fell over them. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, before the first cry could shatter the stillness, Isabeau struck. A shadow, a whisper, and already she had vanished into the darkness, taking one of the guards with her. A strangled gurgle sounded briefly, then nothing. I could have done the same, but why deprive myself of a little spectacle? I stepped out of the shadows and planted myself before the group, an amused smile on my lips. "Good evening, my friends. Lost in the forest." The woman clutched her child tightly. The merchant stumbled backward, eyes wide. One of the mercenaries, quicker than the others, drew his sword.
Which?
He bellowed. I sighed. Which? It was always the same word. Before he could raise his blade, I was upon him. A sharp crack, and his body crumpled lifelessly to the ground. I lifted my gaze to Isabeau, who had reappeared, her face still stained with blood. Her eyes were hard.
That's enough.
She hissed.
Let's finish this.
I studied her for a moment, always so restrained, so intent on getting straight to the point. A slight smirk played on my lips as I gave her a mocking bow. As you wish, my dear. Then I lunged at the merchant, just as Isabeau descended upon the last guard. The night closed its claws around their screams. We thought we were shadows, untouchable, slipping through the ages without leaving a trace. Far from the wars of men, far from their prayers and fears. But sometimes, a mortal, driven by obsession or curse, manages to pierce the veil that protects us. A man capable of seeing what others refuse to believe. The one who hunted us was no ordinary pursuer.
There have always been trackers,
Isabeau explained to me one night.
but this one is different. He does not simply accuse innocence to satisfy the church. He knows exactly what he is looking for.
Who is he? I asked.
A former Templar turned Inquisitor,
She replied.
Brother Esteban of Toledo. He fought in the Holy Land and saw things that changed his faith. He does not just believe in God. He believes in our existence, and that is far more dangerous.
The hunt did not begin with an armed charge or a fiery sermon. Number it seeped into our nights like slow poison, an invisible presence whose echoes we first barely perceived. At first, it was only whispers in the dark, rumors spread by beggars and terrified priests, stories of demonic creatures roaming Paris, of corpses found drained of blood. We had always known that our existence relied on silence, on invisibility, and yet something, or someone, was disturbing that fragile balance. Then came the more tangible signs, a shattered altar in an abandoned chapel where we sometimes took refuge, as if those who hunted us sought to erase all traces of the sacred. A cross carved into the stone of a crypt, symbols drawn in salt at the entrances of certain alleyways, a ritual, a warning, a presence, insistent and silent, seemed to probe the darkness in search of us.
Someone knows.
Isabeau murmured one night as we watched the city from the rooftops of Sainte-Marie. Deep down, I knew it too. The Inquisitor did not strike immediately. He waited. He forced us into error. We changed our hideouts every night, trying to escape this elusive threat, but no matter where we went, he always found a way to remind us that he was there. A corpse marked with sacred symbols, a rumor about shadows being hunted by a monk in dark robes. Then, it was no longer just hints. It became a true hunt. One night, as we prowled the outskirts, a trap closed around us. A street too quiet, a silence too heavy. Then, a prayer murmured in the darkness. And a searing pain shot through my shoulder. A blessed dagger, thrown with inhuman precision. He was there, cloaked in fabric worn by time, his face weathered by age and faith. He watched us with the intensity of a man who knew neither fear nor doubt. His gaze held no hatred, no anger, only the certainty of a sacred duty.
You can run no longer,
He declared in a deep voice. Steel gleamed in the torchlight. The confrontation was inevitable. The battle was brutal, a clash of belief and flesh, a duel between shadow and faith. Inquisitor Esteban stood firm, his silhouette wrapped in darkness, his eyes burning with terrible fervor. He recited prayers in a gravelly voice, each syllable striking like a hammer on an anvil, each word charged with a power even creatures of the night could not ignore. He raised a sanctified dagger, its blessed blade glowing with a spectral light beneath the pale glow. The air vibrated with an ancient energy, a force we knew but could not simply dispel with a glance. Isabeau and I circled him, two predators facing prey that refused to bow, but he had not come unprepared. His cloak shifted with a whisper of fabric, and in a swift motion, he flung a handful of consecrated salt into the air. The grains burned my skin like embers, forcing a hiss from my lips. Steel sliced through the air in a deadly arc. I leapt back, but too late. The blessed blade found its mark, carving a searing wound across my shoulder. An infernal pain radiated through my body, a bite of light that made me growl in fury. He did not stop there. With a dexterity honed by years of fighting creatures of the night, he evaded Isabeau's shadow, his dagger dancing with terrifying precision. She struck back, swift as lightning, her claws grazing the thick fabric of the Inquisitor's robe. He ducked at the last moment, rolling across the ground, and drew a second dagger. His voice rose again, a Latin litany vibrating through the heavy air. Isabeau took a step back, her slit-pupiled eyes narrowing under the weight of the sacred chant. I saw her jaw clench. Even she, usually unshakable, felt the sting of his indomitable faith. But we were patient. We were eternal. With a glance, we exchanged a silent plan. I feigned a frontal attack, rushing forward with a speed that blurred me to human eyes. He raised his blades in a cross to block me, and that was when Isabeau struck. Emerging behind him like a living shadow, she seized his arm, twisting it with a sickening crack. He stifled a cry of pain, but did not release his weapon. With a desperate motion, he plunged his dagger into Isabeau's side. She snarled, her fangs glinting under the flickering torchlight. But pain did not slow her. Her other hand, swift as a serpent, closed around his throat, forcing him back until he struck the cold crypt wall. He struggled, clawing at her grip, murmuring a final prayer through clenched teeth. But prayers are not always enough. A cruel smile touched Isabeau's lips as she leaned closer. Her eyes gleamed with a ravenous hunger. With an almost tender gesture, she brushed a strand of hair from his sweat-dampened forehead. He looked at her, not with the fervor of a warrior, but with the resignation of a martyr. His prayers died on his lips as she sank her fangs into his flesh. His body tensed for an instant, then his strength drained away, his life spilling in silent streams between Isabeau's lips. She drank slowly, savoring every drop of the man who had dared to defy her. When she finally straightened, her pupils burned with dark satisfaction. Esteban collapsed onto the dusty floor of the crypt. His fingers trembled, grasping at an invisible rosary, then stilled. Silence fell, thick and oppressive. I glanced at Isabeau, wiping away the blackened blood still beading on my shoulder. She smiled, her fangs still stained red.
He was tough.
She murmured.
Too much faith, not enough luck.
I looked down at the fallen hunter, a shiver running through me. He was dead, yes. But something in his frozen expression, in the way his lips remained slightly parted on an unfinished whisper, made me feel as though he was still cursing us, even beyond his last breath. We were free, but at what cost? As dawn approached, Isabeau met my gaze, and I understood that this wandering would never end. Paris was ours, for a little while longer, but the world would never stop hunting us.